afternoon. Is this on? No, it's this. So, wait a minute. Can people hear me? This is not on. Hello? Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, Common New Ground, Nordic Perspectives. For those of you that were not here earlier, I am Anita Berrispeitia. I'm professor and chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And together with Ovard Steinhold, we will be hosting this session and leading the discussion. So to give you just a plan for what we will be doing for the next 90 minutes, we begin the session with Ovard, with a small frame that he's going to set up for us, followed by a representative from all of the Nordic countries, each of whom will present a project that characterizes the challenges they are facing today in the implementation of common new grounds. We will have presentations in the following order: Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. And each presenter will introduce him or herself as they come up. Following all of the presentations, then all of the speakers and Howard and I will come up to the stage and we will engage in conversations. So thank you very much for being here, Howard.
Yep, there's my presentation. And this is the box. There we are. I'm from the property and law side. I'm not from the landscape architect side, even if I'm in the same faculty at our university at Oslo. So I will speak to you from the law perspective, but maybe quite rapidly come into some aspects of interest from you and why you are so interesting to this subject. Straight on, this is kind of the legal definition from Norwegian law. I produced it myself, and it's the Norwegian standard, kind of. And it's also said that this is kind of the principle of free access for rambling. And then I mean free in two meanings. It's open for everybody. It's also free of charge. At least in Norway, it is illegal to charge anybody to walk the mountain. And the principle is that foot-based activities are independent of ownership. Most of the resources are a privilege for the owner, but the act of moving is not. And that's kind of the main principle. So the sign you sometimes find around to the left down there, it's from a law perspective totally meaningless. It's the same right to walk if you are on public land, state land, municipal land, whatsoever, and on private land, or on common land, which is another use of that word than you use, I understand. Why? These lines are property borders in Norway, and of course in specifically this area. If you had to negotiate with every landowner, you will meet a new one every 130 meters. The narrowest path is 3 meters wide, 2.5 kilometers long. So alternatives to the all-man right, as we call it, hardly exist with that kind of property structures. All-man right is much older than these structures, so that's not why we have it. Going to Norwegian law, we find that the open access land is negatively defined in law. The only thing that the law says is where you're not allowed to walk. And that means it's in principle everywhere, except the categories of land which the law mentions. And that also means that walking freely on plazas and streets in the city, you do under the cover of the old man right. It's not only the mountains and the forests, it's also in the midst of the city. Another interesting thing is that the law presupposes a system of understanding and acting that's based totally on the visual observation. As a kind of cultivated person, you should know from what you see if you can be there or not. And another limitation of what you can do is connected to the effects and the effects only. And nobody can see clearly how strongly these effects should be. There are always effects, so it's more or less a political question when the effects are negative. At the start, trampling things in nature makes it a cultivated landscape. And it's only when we don't want it anymore, it's a problem. In the Nordic countries, this old man right is considered very special. It's not, but it's special to the Nordic people that we think it's only exists here. That's the only special thing in the Nordic countries about it, because it exists in the most of the world as a principle that foot walking, moving is free outside the clearly privacy zones. So it's more or less international, and that's also one thing to keep in mind if you want to alter the general principles. It's not only a national issue, it's larger than that. There are exceptions in some states in the world and some big states, even American states, but the main picture is that foot walking is free everywhere. And it includes, you can read the rest of it, we are in a hurry. It includes, at least in the Nordic countries, organized activities. That's not a question if it's organized or not. It's the effects of it that limits it, not the degree of organization. And it's also very important for commercial uses. Nordic people, because they think that this only exists here, get very, very annoyed when this principle is challenged. They can even go as close to angry as Nordic people can, which they cannot. The dominating tourism concept that covers like 90% or something on at least Norwegian tourism contains of this. You get hold of a plot, you get hold of some roads or an infrastructure, you build yourself a hotel, and there you bring in money from food, bed, beverages is the most important, and some dirty films in the hotel rooms. But what are you really living from? This. You send your guests out in nature, meaning on the neighbor's land. And that's the concept of tourism. And alternatives are hardly acceptable for the tourism industry at all. Some summing up recommendation from this very, very short presentation. I think for planners and landscape architects is to be aware of that it is a kind of personal freedom to move freely wherever you want if there is no very, very good reasons not to. And if you don't have a problem, don't solve it. Planners has a tendency to solve problems in forehand and making problems into conflicts. If you have a local problem, solve it locally. Not by challenging general, larger principles. And be aware of that ramblers don't carry around a lot of documents. They have to understand the situation by what they actually see. Can I be here, or am I now in a privacy situation where I'm not welcome? And that's where the landscape architect trade is the most important one. Because that how to regulate behavior and access is how the surroundings are designed. Doesn't help with any plan, document, or map, because that's not how human beings walk around. They behave from what they feel and see, and I must say that I'm not always impressed by the eternal situation in cities, even in very nice green areas. When I bring up the question, does this tell me where to be and where not to be? So in the end, the principle of open access, which in Nordic countries are called the allemannsrett, it works very well. There are some hotspots where we have problems, but things are hardly worse now than they used to be. And to the audience, problems should preferably be solved not by lawyers, not by formal plans, but by actual practical landscape design. Thank you.